2021 was the year the cage doors opened, and the world discovered that freedom isn't just the absence of confinement. It's something that has to be chosen, practiced, and built from the inside out. Hey everybody, I'm Mystic Brew, founder of Return to Self, where I help you remember who you were before the world taught you who to be. And this is Hot Girl Math, where we do energetic equations and put it all together because the cosmos are giving us clues all the time. If you've been following the journey, then you know that we've been time traveling since 2016. And today we are going to connect the dots and see what patterns were coming up in 2021. Let's get started. As you know, we always start with numerology, and in 2021, we were coming out of that heavy constraint of a 4-year, which we spoke about in the last video. So 2021 was a 5-year. Now in numerology, 5 is the number of freedom, of change, movement, but also instability, liberation, and the unexpected. It's one of the most unpredictable numbers in the cycle, and it's restless by nature. It's hungry for experience and momentum after confinement. So you can imagine what this means for 2021, when in 2020, all we knew was confinement. A 5-year asks us, okay, now that you know what's going on in these old structures that you are getting rid of, what are you going to do with this freedom? Now, as always, 5 has a shadow side like everything else, and that looks like being chaotic, impulsive, being an escapist, and being addicted to stimulation over depth. And we felt that in 2021, understandably so. Coming off the heels of 2020, we couldn't even do anything. We were stuck in our homes using Zoom and TikTok and whatever else we could to foster connection and bonds and communication. So when 2021 hit, it was more like this desperation for release. It was us sitting with the uncertainty of the time that we were in, but also uncertain what to do with it. And then also kind of moving between this really drastic spectrum of hope and relapse, hope and relapse. Now we also look at the Chinese zodiac, and 2021 was the year of the ox, specifically the white metal ox. Now the ox in the Chinese zodiac is a year when perseverance is rewarded. Being diligent, hardworking, and honest is a payoff here. The ox symbolizes stability, rigor, and prosperity. The ox is said to be one of the least flashy, yet one of the most likable of the zodiac. Their practical mindset is both their greatest asset and at times their detriment. I wouldn't know anything about that. The metal element, as you may remember, adds a sharpness to this energy. There is an uncompromising quality to the ox's steady energy, similar to what we spoke about in the last video. Metal does not bend. It does not move with ease. So this doesn't forgive shortcuts. This energy is showing up with a profound tension between the 5 years that numerology's hunger for freedom, but then this metal ox energy that's insistent on methodical, patient discipline, which is actually more aligned with a 4-year. So it's interesting to see this sort of polarity of energy trying to come together and see what happens. And we saw it. 2021 was defined precisely by this sort of friction. Everyone wanted to run while reality kept demanding that we slow down and do the work. The last metal ox year was 1961, and that was a year defined by the Berlin Wall going up, the Bay of Pigs invasion, and the beginning of the space race. 60 years later, and we are still experiencing power struggles and humanity straining at its own limits. So let's get into the astrology. What might arguably be one of the most defining and dominant transits of 2021 was Saturn square Uranus. This occurred 3 times in 2021, roughly February 17th, June 14th, and December 24th, depending on your time zone. Now, we've talked a lot about Saturn, so you may be familiar if you've been watching, but of course I'll give you a refresher. Saturn is the planet of restriction, limitation, structure, karma, boundaries, stability, rules, control, discipline, authority, responsibility. So kind of like that metal ox energy. And then Uranus, I can't remember if we've touched on Uranus yet or not, maybe. But either way, Uranus is like the complete opposite of that. It is the need for freedom and change, bringing sudden and unexpected breakdowns and breakthroughs, flashes of insight, sudden awakenings, rebellion, revolution. So then you can see this 5 energy with Uranus. So in a way, funny enough, astrology, even with this one transit that was sort of dominating all of 2021, was quite potently illustrating the friction between that metal ox energy and that numerology of 5. It's almost like they're connected. Anyway, as you can probably imagine, a square between these 2 planets, which once again, a square is an angle in astrology that illustrates tension, friction, brings about a sense of friction and crises and forced confrontation between these 2 energies. Now, at the time, Saturn was in Aquarius, which it rules, and Uranus was in Taurus. So this pairing can look like collective systems and social order, Saturn in Aquarius, versus individual bodies, Uranus and Taurus. We have financial security and the physical earth, vaccines and anti-vaccine movements, government mandates, personal freedom, old economic order, crypto and NFTs, institution versus individual. Every major story of 2021 had some sort of through line in these themes. Additionally, Jupiter was in Aquarius in 2021 and, did a little cha-cha into Pisces at some point, but spent most of the year in Aquarius as well. And Aquarius is the sign of collective innovation, humanitarian ideals, social networks. We touched on Aquarius in the very first video because we are currently experiencing Pluto moving through Aquarius, and this is a very long transit. I'm talking 2044. Is when this transit ends. So it depends on the planet. Some are longer, some are shorter. But with Jupiter in Aquarius, this is amplified themes of collective coordination, of global projects, of social media as both an organizing tool and a weapon, which we now know is actively being used as a weapon with propaganda, with mindset. So the tension between individual liberty and communal responsibility were at an all-time high in 2021, with Jupiter's influence, again, expanding, amplifying, as Jupiter does, because we've talked about it, in Aquarius. And in even more Aquarius news, in February of 2021, there was an Aquarius stellium happening. Now, a stellium in astrology is when there's 3 or more planets or luminaries in one sign in a very sort of fixed, sort of conjoined space. I might be making up words. It's fine. It sounds good. So in February of 2021, we had the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn, all in Aquarius. So this is a concentration of planets in that sign, and we have not seen that since 1962. All of these planets in Aquarius, because they're all in the same sign and close together at this point, are now simultaneously squaring off with Uranus in Taurus. So it was a very volatile opening to the year. And that was exactly what January and February of 2021 delivered. The Capitol insurrection fallout, which we'll touch on, the second impeachment, and the inauguration, all within days of each other while this is happening in the cosmos. So since we're on the topic, let's talk a little bit about some history that happened first nationally in 2021. And I gotta be real with you guys, when I think back on even just the last 6 years, we'll just use 2020 as the marker. For whatever reason, 2021 is the year that just floats away. I cannot grasp what happened in 2021, even in my own personal life. When I try to think back on memories, it's like either I was dissociated by, I don't know what was going on in 2021. It's such a blur. It's like that 1 year, and perhaps it has to do with some of this astrology in my personal chart and how it was influencing everything. But man, I'm constantly like, oh yeah, that was a year that happened. Anyway, it's not about me. On January 6th, 2021, a mob of pro-Trump demonstrators stormed the U.S. Capitol in an effort to stop lawmakers from certifying the results of the 2020 presidential election. 5 people died in the chaos either shortly before, during, or following the event, including a Capitol Police officer. Lawmakers from both political parties, including Vice President Mike Pence, were forced to flee the congressional chamber for safety. Accused of inciting his supporters to riot, Trump became the first president to be impeached and acquitted twice. Third time's a charm. I'm just kidding. I don't know. Anyway, meanwhile, Kamala Harris made history when she was sworn in as the 49th U.S. Vice President on January 20th, 2021, becoming the first woman, the first Black American, and the first Asian American to occupy the office. Biden was inaugurated as the 46th president the same day. Then the COVID-19 vaccine rolled out, dominating the first half of the year. On August 23rd, the FDA fully approved the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine for people aged 16 and older following analysis of an expanded clinical trial, which found the vaccine to be 91% effective. Vaccine mandates, hesitancy, and the Delta variant made the pandemic's second year in many ways more politically divisive than the first. And I'm going to keep it brief. I'm just going to keep it brief because I do remember that. I remember there was a lot of hypocrisy that I was seeing, which runs rampant across everything we talk about. But it was interesting to see people who, and this may make you feel a type of way, and that's okay, were allowed to talk about things that we may disagree on. I saw so many women, especially, who just months before were yelling about the rights for the female body, our choice, her body, her choice. And yet, when there were women, anybody really, but especially I noticed it with women, when there were women who expressed that they did not want to be vaccinated, that they did not feel safe getting the vaccine, all of a sudden it's not her choice anymore. Granted, I understand we're talking about very completely different things, but the root, which is what I focus on if you haven't caught on, is the same, which is you don't get to tell another person what to do with their body. You don't know their body. You don't know how they react to different things within the body. And although this might be a more righteous fight, this idea of health and wellness, and obviously many people wanted this pandemic to end, it also allowed the shadow to be seen, which is her body, her choice, as long as I agree with it. And this is a much deeper conversation that has nothing to do with vaccines. It is a broader discussion that I'm sure we will have once we're done with our time traveling about the hypocrisy that keeps us stuck in these loops. We all have a shadow, and we are all given opportunities to see it. That was one of them. Remember how I told you that we always break records? Well, allegedly, we broke another one. Because of the January 6th chaos, this was the first time in history that there was not a peaceful transition of power for a democratic country. Foreshadowing, perhaps. Lastly, the killing of George Floyd, which happened in 2020, we spoke about it, continued to reverberate amongst society and amongst different power structures and spark conversation. His killer, Derek Chauvin, was found guilty on all 3 counts of murder and manslaughter on April 20th, a verdict that felt historic given the rarity of police accountability convictions in U.S. history. Now, again, we are time traveling back into time, so unfortunately, although that may have seemed like accountability was finally going to be the status quo, I think we all know that was not the case. Some of the big headlines, we have the supply chains that were buckling down worldwide as factories that had closed during the pandemic struggled to meet surging consumer demand. In March of 2021, the container ship Ever Given ran aground in the Suez Canal, blocking one of the world's major waterways for a week and generating costs estimated to run, wait for it, $9.6 billion a day. A day. A single ship accidentally illustrating just how fragile the global economy's interconnected infrastructure had become. Speaking of the economy, in September of 2021, El Salvador became the first country in the world to accept Bitcoin as an official currency, marking a radical experiment that split economists and signaled how seriously crypto was beginning to challenge traditional financial structures. Moving to pop culture, the Capitol insurrection on January 6th was simultaneously a historical event and a live-streamed pop culture moment. This was broadcast in real time across social media, analyzed on podcasts and late-night television for months. Then there was the image of Senator Bernie Sanders when he was sitting at the inauguration 2 weeks later with his mittens and his arms all crossed and he was all bundled and his bagged lunch. That became our favorite meme for 2021. A portrait of weary, practical decency that the internet needed desperately. A lot of 2021 also focused on Britney Spears' fight to end her conservatorship, which, going back to freedom, liberation, breaking free, and the unrelenting support of the #FreeBritney movement. The February documentary Framing Britney Spears exposed to a new generation the mechanics of her 13-year legal imprisonment, and it touched on how a woman's body, finances, labor, and reproductive choices had been controlled by her father with court approval while she performed for the world with a smile. Her formal release from the conservatorship came on November 12th, 2021, by Los Angeles Superior Court Judge Brenda Penny. The story was more than just celebrity gossip. It was a lens for examining how women's autonomy, mental health, and credibility are institutionally managed and dismissed. In March, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry sat down with Oprah and dismantled the mythology of the British royal family. They spoke openly about the alleged racism, institutional abandonment, and a wall of silence around Meghan's suicidal ideation. Again, it's this idea of finally breaking the cage doors open. And in my eyes, this is another example of that. When I first heard the story about Meghan and Prince Harry and leaving the royal line and everything that they were sacrificing, which other people might be like, hello, access, status, but at what cost? And I felt like that was such a great example of the energy that was constantly coming up. At what cost? And that's what liberation asks you. What's interesting is the timing of this video aligns with the Libra full moon that we just had. And this Libra full moon is all about when harmony becomes avoidance. Where is the imbalance? And when you are truly seeking liberation, which starts within, it comes with so much responsibility and a level of surrender and trust that is terrifying. We are always talking about freedom like it is just this get out of jail free card that gets handed to us and then everything will be okay. But not many of us actually sit down and consider what freedom will cost and if you are willing to pay it. Liberation requires you to have a sense of responsibility and accountability with how you choose to lead your life, to experience the world, to take care of the world. And we've been shown time and time again how quickly we are willing to abandon and betray ourselves in order to keep the peace. And with different examples, personally, collectively, we were being shown, how long are you going to do that? You say you want freedom, but then you keep doing the things that you always do to keep things the way they always were, so you wouldn't have to deal with the confrontation that comes with doing it differently. So, how's that going to work? We'll get there. Anyway, Squid Game burst into the scene in 2021. I never watched it, and I get it. It was like a big deal, but I'm not mad that I never watched it because from what I heard, no thank you. Either way, it quickly captured the world's attention and became Netflix's most watched show ever, reaching over 142 million households in just 4 weeks. The series used a deadly competition of children's games to investigate themes of economic disparity and desperation. Sounds like a great thing to watch when you're stuck in the house. The other big moment for Squid Games is that it's a Korean language show about capitalism's cruelty that became the most watched television series in Netflix history, dethroning English language content globally. And that was a cultural event that was significant in and of itself. NFTs exploded in 2021, and I still couldn't tell you. I mean, non-fungible token, right? What does that mean? I don't know. Either way, LeBron James had a dunk video clip to a decade-old Nyan Cat GIF. I refuse to say GIF, just FYI. And people were spending thousands, if not more, to claim ownership of these digital assets. NFTs became the year's most surreal financial and cultural phenomenon, which was a collision of art, speculation, crypto, and the dawning age of digital ownership. The questions they raised, what's value, what's ownership, what's real, were also deeply aligned with the moment that we were collectively experiencing. The metaverse arrived in 2021 when Facebook rebranded as Meta in October, signaling its pivot toward building virtual reality spaces where people could live, work, and socialize. Coming off 2 years of pandemic isolation, the announcement felt both inevitable and deeply unsettling, especially for those of us who watched Black Mirror. Hello? Maybe that's why. Maybe that's why I don't remember 2021 much, because maybe we did a timeline jump, because God forbid. I'm getting itchy. Could you imagine we just were, again, no thank you. Travis Scott faced enormous consequences after 9 people were crushed to death in the crowd at his Astro World Festival. This obviously brought up a lot of increased focus and concern on the health and safety of concert goers after live events returned from pandemic hiatus. Another theme of reclaiming ownership, Taylor Swift re-recorded Fearless and Red in 2021, her Taylor's Version project, reclaiming that ownership of her masters, which then became a personal act of artistic sovereignty and a years-long cultural event in its own right. Adele's 30 released in November, becoming the fastest-selling album of the year in both the US and the UK, a record on divorce, grief, and the courage to rebuild yourself, very much that 5 energy. And then Silk Sonic, Bruno Mars and Anderson .Paak, brought unironic, joyful 70s soul back into the mainstream. Lil Nas X's Montero album and its accompanying videos, which included Satan's Shoes and Pole Dancing to Hell, were equal parts artistic provocation and liberation theology. So again, we're seeing how the themes, whether we know it or not, are playing and dancing with each other. So really quick, let's go over the top 10 major headlines of the year. We have the January 6th Capitol insurrection. We have the COVID-19 vaccines being rolled out. George Floyd's killer was convicted, which was a rare moment of police accountability. Kamala Harris was inaugurated as the VP. Free Britney and her conservatorship ends. Squid Game becomes a global phenomenon. Oh my God. You guys, it's just one of those words for me, okay? Someone just tell me how to say it. The canal blockage was a major headline of 2021. Facebook becoming Meta, and the Glasgow Climate Summit was a top headline where world leaders gathered, pledges were made, and climate scientists said it's not enough. So as always, when we take a look at all of these things through a zoomed out lens, what are the three core themes that we are seeing connected to everything? One is that liberation versus control that we kept touching on. It's like the prison that we don't see, the golden cage that we become comfortable in. We saw this with Saturn squaring Uranus, the metal ox's uncompromising insistence on structure, the 5 years hunger for freedom after the 4 years confinement, and then 2021 being saturated with this question of who controls who, and is this cage visible? Britney Spears was literally imprisoned by a legal system while performing freedom for the world for 13 years. The Afghan people had their fragile democracy handed back to the Taliban in days. Myanmar's democratic leader was arrested overnight. Vaccine mandates pitted bodily autonomy against collective safety. January 6th was, again, a group of people who believed they were acting to liberate something, but instead attacked the very institution they claimed to protect. Make it make sense. The question of what it actually means to be free versus the performance of freedom ran through everything because it needed to. We also saw the old guard cracking and new voices arriving in 2021. So again, with the 5-year and Uranus in Taurus, which, side note, Taurus rules the throat and the voice. When that 5-year and Uranus and Taurus come together, it signals disruption of established financial and cultural power. We saw this with the NFTs and crypto, challenging who owns value and who gets to say so. We saw this with Squid Game confronting Hollywood's English language monopoly on global storytelling. Meanwhile, Taylor Swift's re-recordings said artists own their art, not the labels. And this was really when Gen Z just started to, again, create more of this ripple. Gen Z arrived not just culturally, but politically and economically. They were not asking permission. Meanwhile, the old guard were simultaneously reasserting control wherever a vacuum appeared. And so we saw this energetic war between two forces that define this year's texture. As I often say, and I feel like we're experiencing it today still, when something knows it's about to die, nothing dies. Transition, transform, transmute. It gets loud. It's its final scream. It's its beg and plea to remain, to survive, to not have to change. But when change is inevitable, it will happen regardless. Unfortunately, due to this, sometimes it's chaotic. Lastly, we saw a theme of collective exhaustion, which honestly I think we're still in, and this sort of long hangover of trauma. The world survived 2020. We made it to 2021, but then it's like we got there and we didn't know what to do now. Nothing was the same. It was almost more difficult than an emergency, because at least with the emergency, it's like, okay, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. Now it's like we are entering this world that we don't know, because it is a world that is now shaped by something no one's experienced before. And we saw some of that energy reflected throughout the year. We saw it with Adele's album, which was the most bought album of the year. And it was all about grief and what you do and how you cope when the dramatic crisis is done. How do you move forward? Squid Games also resonated deeply because people understood the desperation of its characters in their bones. Astroworld and its tragedy happened because people were so hungry for a live experience, for being around people, for trying to get back to any sense of normalcy after being in isolation for 18 months. 2021 was the year that we really wanted to let out this deep exhale from the breath that we were holding for so long. But it turns out that we didn't really know how. Now, before I get into your shadow work reflective questions, you already know that I pulled an activation card. I don't know what it is, as to what we were collectively activating in 2021. So let's see if I can pick it up. Let's see what we got. Drum roll, please. Delight, number 19, which makes me think of the Sun card in tarot. The frequency of delight supports our capacity to create and experience feelings of intense joy and happiness. The more delight we feel, the more delight we evoke in others. Are we sure? Let's look at the guidebook. Dang, I almost turned right to it. Delight literally means from the light. Science refers to light as an electromagnetic radiation that we can measure in wavelengths, and visible light as a range of wavelengths and variations of color that we can perceive with the human eye. In the new energy, we are asked to consider the multidimensional attributes of light as fundamental to what we believe about it as well. Light has a quantum attribute and is nonlinear. It is an energy that can be created through consciousness, and consciousness can create it in return. Light influences our awareness, our perception, and therefore our reality. We associate the word delight with feelings of pleasure, joy, and happiness. Joy and bliss are considered to have some of the highest frequencies of all emotions. By feeling joyful or blissful, our frequency goes up. The higher our frequency, the more light we generate, and the more we can shine in return. That's interesting. As I was reading what came up for me, again, doing the hawk girl math of if we have this ox energy, but then we also have this 5 energy that just wants liberation, wants freedom. But then we're also being taught that, okay, you want this freedom, you need the ox. Because if you want this freedom to be sustainable, you need to know how to hold this much responsibility, which is where the ox's energy comes in. And at the same time, you are being asked, again, what were you expressing, experiencing, allowing performatively, and what is actually true delight for you? If you were really to experience life the way you would want to experience it, does it actually look like what you think you want? Or are you realizing that what you thought you wanted is not delightful, is not joyful, is not blissful? It's just what you got used to. It's what you thought was available to you. That's the cage we talk about. That's the shadow work. We see it reflected, yes, in our systems, our structures, the way that our infrastructure is built on a societal and global level. But this is a reflection of what we create inside of ourselves, the imprisonment we create within ourselves. This is the first thing that comes to mind, is the artist who abandons their art because they don't feel like their art has value, and therefore they do what they feel they need to do in order to experience stability. because we have taught artists, unfortunately, that art does not pay the bills. And yet art is some of the most potent political activism that we can do. It is history, it is storytelling, it is magic. It creates worlds, it shifts perception, which therefore shifts reality. So of course, art is not something that is supported or praised or acknowledged and celebrated, encouraged. It's something you can do if you have the resources and time. But do you ever have the resources and time? Let's make sure they don't, so the artist never comes out. And I'm telling you right now, every artist is a healer and every healer is an artist. The two coexist. They come from the same place. When you unlock one, you unlock the other. And how dangerous would that be for an infrastructure that is dependent on you not being able to embody that wisdom, that magic? Let's go to your shadow work reflective questions for 2021. As always, if you want to dive deeper into this, I offer some more reflection questions and prompts on my Substack, which is linked below. So something to ask yourself when you jog your memory and you get back into the space of 2021, which is hopefully easier for you than it is for me. What were you imprisoned by without fully naming it? Now, again, we saw this with the Saturn-Uranus square, with the Free Britney story. All of this energy is asking what structures, whether it's legal, relational, psychological, financial, are constraining you that you've either normalized or cannot clearly see. Something else to ask yourself about that year is what new version of yourself kept trying to emerge that the old structure kept suppressing. The 5-year and the generational shift of 2021 pointed to this energy of something new wanting to be born, but kept being sent back to wait. It's like the old guard was cracking, but it wasn't quite collapsed yet. So there was still hesitancy. And lastly, what were you still carrying from 2020 that you hadn't fully set down? Like I mentioned, 2021 was that long hangover. The world rushed back toward normalcy before the grief was even processed, even acknowledged. And we're still in it, mind you, whether we consciously realize it or not. So if that's true collectively, then perhaps there was something for you personally that you were carrying, grief that you were carrying, that you hadn't quite known how to set down. And just like that, we are over halfway done with our time traveling, you guys. Just a few more years to go before we are back to the present moment of 2026, where we will be able to chat about what's going on now and see how the last 10 years were shaping what we are experiencing at this time in history. As always, thank you so much for spending time with me and for listening to me yap about all kinds of random stuff and just do what I do. I appreciate you. Please like, subscribe, and comment. Get your friends together. Do a little hot girl math party. As always, you can find more of my work on my Substack linked below. And let's see, there was something else I wanted to mention. Oh, my Dark Side of the Moon workshop on April 11th. This is going to be a 90-minute workshop where I help you navigate and decode your emotional underworld through your moon sign in astrology. If you do not know your moon sign, that's perfectly okay. I'm going to teach you how to find it out. And then we're going to talk about it because the moon is such an important placement when it comes to your shadow. The more you know. Join us. It'll be very illuminating. It will also be very freeing because you'll probably learn things about yourself that you didn't know, but you needed to know. And now that you know, you could do better. Until next time. To connect the dot, no, let's start from the beginning. We were coming out, no, fucking shit. One of the most, they're practical, what the fuck? Lastly, the killing of economists and signaled the Suez, man, how do you say that word? Facebook, oh my God, Taurus, no, I don't even remember what I said.